Okay, so I usually start these reviews with an intro where I explain that there are areas that a Christian, devout or otherwise, might hesitate and consider before playing a specific game, and that in and of itself might come as a shock to many of you, but just this once, I think that with all the controversy from the LGBTQ community and the history of the Harry Potter franchise, at least in the theologically conservative side of things, I think we'll skip over that bit and jump right into the game review. So let me just adjust my agenda here a little bit. We'll skip that. Yeah, we'll get to that shortly. Oh, that'll be fun. Hogwarts Legacy throws the player into the wizarding world, entering them into the titular school as a 5th year rather than the usual 1st year, but with a borrowed wand and a number of mentors, tutors, and a handy field guide book to get you sorted. And speaking of sorting, the game begins with a long cutscene that sets the stage by introducing your main mentor, Professor Fig, and revealing that you have a rare ability to see traces of ancient magic. This revelation is interrupted by a dragon and a quick bamf away to a crumbling castle and the tutorial. You're given a few spells to get you on your way and eventually arrive at Hogwarts, just in time for the headmaster to grudgingly allow you to be sorted. Once sorted and given your field guide, which is your quest log, map, collectibles, list, settings, and stats menu effectively, you're set out on your own to explore the castle. And explore you can. You're free to wander around and gawk at the sights and sounds of Hogwarts, solve puzzles, open chests, gather pages, unlock fast travel points, discover POI, and start side quests, as well as gathering new gear in the form of clothes. Eventually, you will find that you'll have to follow the golden path at some point to unlock the rest of the map. For eventually, after a few classes, you're given leave to walk to Hogsmeade, where you gather your supplies, a new wand of your own, and eventually buy a broom. And once broom is in hand, the map is your pumpkin juice to drink as you see fit. Wander around and get into fights, discover caves galore, find the dozens of quests and Merlin trials to unlock, chart on your map locations for magical animals or bandit camps or collection chests, and pop balloons. The southern coast and a number of quest caverns are the only areas locked off for later in the game, and there are some areas that you can't enter while on your broom, but the rest is open to explore. But at some point, you'll want to move the story along. I'll not spoil things too much, but the story leads you through the seasons of the school year, uncovering a secret chamber under Hogwarts. Seriously? These secret chambers need to start popping up in different places, as well as claiming the Room of Requirement as your own HQ for the game. Each major story beat is locked until you've done a number of other quests and have taken a few classes to prepare you with the right arsenal to face them. And eventually, you'll finish the quest, save the world, and win the House Cup. And no, that's not a spoiler, it's just Hogwarts. So, as the protagonist, you are going to win the House Cup. The combat is surprisingly fun. You can dodge and roll and parry, and combo spells with basic casts to keep the cooldowns of any specific spell down. And when you hit the perfect Protego and get to stun the big boss over and over again because his mobs just keep attacking you, well, that's just gratuitous fun. Eventually, though, the battles do get harder, you gain too many spells, and having to keep swapping between loadouts begins to feel a little clunky. There are some very OP builds that you can create, and if you choose to learn the unforgivable curses, they can make the game just easy mode for many fights. But I personally felt that the early game combat was great, but grew a bit long in the tooth near the end game. Once you've learned all the spells, however, there are both too many to use properly in any particular battle, and not enough to really feel like I'm able to make up my own playstyle. Maybe Elden Ring and the entire Dark Souls series have ruined me, but if the bosses get to have gimmick battles, I want to have a gimmick loadout. And that's not really present in Hogwarts Legacy. The spells are somewhat different, but the blue spells feel move-ish. The red spells are for damage, and the yellow spells are there for utility, and the occasional yellow shield that needs to break. And there's not really any special gear that changes any of this. The game is chock-a-block with openness. So much that I have to say it is one of the prettiest open worlds I've had the pleasure of exploring. You don't have to wander for even half a minute before you stumble across a collectible, or a trial, or NPC, or some interesting landmark or chest. And yes, they do gate you into the castle for a few side quests after the tutorial, and then gate you off the southern coast and Pacific Caves for quest reasons, but once you've gotten out of the castle, you can pretty much go anywhere, which feels really freeing as a player, for a time. Eventually, the map fills up with tasks, and after the first few dozen Merlin trials, when you realize that there are only about 10 kinds but 90 trials, and then there's the relationship quests, bandit camps, beast dens, arenas, it all does eventually suffer from clutter syndrome. Yes, they wanted to fill the map with interesting bits and make the world seem lived in, but to this day, no map has ever felt alive to me as the map from Blades of Exile, Ruined World, where every corner of the map is created to provide feeling, and each encounter was handmade by a master storyteller. Hogwarts Legacy's kind of cut-and-paste to-do list filler needs to stop. If you're trying to sell that it's a magical world of mystery and intrigue, don't copy and paste. We have copy and paste in the real world. Put random bits in there that don't pop up as tasks, but do react and change when you figure out what to do with them. This is where the game will either shine or fail you as a player. Please understand that this game is not created for the Elden Ring, Bloodborne, or even Revenant crowd. It's created for the Potterheads to act as a Mary Sue to allow you to experience what it's like to live out the experience of going to Hogwarts. And to an amazingly stunning degree. They literally start you off in a scene that harks back to when Dumbledore took Harry to recruit Slughorn in a dingy alley, with a mentor and "Oh yes, I'll join you in going to Hogwarts" meeting. Then they nudge you in the ribs playfully as the Thestrals fade into view, show you a portkey working, and then give you the tutorial. Once the game is learned, it's back to the Hogwarts Express for you to continue living out your childhood. They can't send you an owl with a letter, but they do zoom off in a cutscene following an owl over the Hogwarts Express itself. And since you, as a fifth year, they don't want to handhold you as much as a first year would have to, can't ride over the lake with Hagrid, they fly you over the lake to the castle, where you get to actually be sorted and explore the castle and the house common rooms and go to classes with quirky teachers and be surrounded by the world. They literally have the seasons change as you progress the story, and as the cherry on top, they have you win the House Cup after being given bonus points for saving the day. It's all very nostalgic, follows the formula of the books as much as they can, but though it is a decent action RPG, it ultimately fails as a Hogwarts student simulator. Okay, before we get into the theological and religious objections that you might have with it, there are some fundamental plot and gameplay problems that I would be remiss for overlooking. First off, since this game is a Mary Sue, the main character must start off as a fifth year, entering school for the first time. And though this is remarked as being odd and almost entirely without precedent, it's never explained why. You have to headcanon it yourself. My personal headcanon is that the rare ability to see ancient magic suppresses witch or wizard's natural expression of magic until later. And since he was from a muggle home, it wouldn't have come out on its own until fifth year, but I digress. And why is he so surprised by the Wizarding Bank? Has he not been to the bank before? Where did I come from? Do I have parents? How am I so good at magic if I've never learned anything about it yet? None of this is explained or even hand-waved away. It's noted that it's super rare, and then promptly forgotten. Second, why is Hogwarts such a bad school? Yes, it does make it more convenient as a game to only go to class once, and then only to learn a single spell, or maybe a few spells, possibly a few classes, but each class only lasts about 5 minutes, and then it's off to exploring again. And where are all the students? The movies portray hallways lined with kids, and the main hall is choked with students eating at the massive tables. But then in the game, there can only be maybe 40 students eating at the big sorting hat feast, and at least 10 of them are in fifth-year charms. So ultimately, the school feels a bit vacant at times. We should be able to pass classrooms filled with students, but they're all empty. And furthermore, The devs stated that they were going to eschew the normal gamification of a morality system like in Dishonored, Fallout, Undertale, or countless others. They wanted to open it up to the freedom of choosing whatever path you wanted. So they intentionally didn't include a morality system, which in effect means that they included an immorality system, where the players are incentivized to take the dark path. And no, I'm not saying that they were all in a meeting somewhere, rubbing their hands together, plotting to subvert the youth of the world. But when you take away the consequences of greed and selfishness and violence, you are in effect condoning and validating the easy path to power and riches. So, for each side quest you finish, you're given the option to hand over the whatever it was you were sent to gather, or to keep it, or to ask for money in exchange. And the obvious choice is the one where you're given more money, because, hey, money! You're given the option to learn the unforgivable curses, and then can use them on students and cats and whatever. But ultimately, nobody cares. And this is the horrible consequence that I hope everybody can grasp, Christian or non. By taking away the consequences of their choice, they have effectively taken away the meaning of that choice. No longer can a player indulge in a bit of darkness, enjoying the forbidden pleasure for a season and the risk of being caught. No longer can the player bathe in the righteousness of selflessness as they deny themselves for future reward. It's just finishing a quest or task, as gratifying as finishing Merlin Trial 83. There's no reward or punishment. There's no point. And yes, plenty of games have done morality systems poorly, or have had overblown reactions for slight infractions, or accidentally attacking a chicken. But there are lots of interesting and colorful and meaningful ways they could have imposed some meaning on the player's choice. But sadly, as it stands, Hogwarts Legacy is in the darkest timeline. No, not the timeline where a young rebel Tom Riddle gathers a plucky band of friends to be the baddest of the bad in the school of evil, only to have that goody two-shoes keep trying to get him in trouble and calling the ministry. No, even an anti-hero story would have been interesting at least. This is just a satire, where McGonagall watches on carelessly as Malfoy sectum sempras Harry, then calmly reminds them both to have their papers revised whenever they feel like it, or else she'll not care. And finally, I have a big problem with the mounts. You can get a broom and a hippogriff and a grafhorn to ride, and other than the land-bound Cthulhu Rhino, which operates as I'm used to by now from playing games with hard-to-control horses, the broom and the hippogriff are just clunky to ride. When I can't look up, it's weird. But when I can't look down without diving, that's just bad control. Come on, we've done better flight controls in games from the 90s on the SNES. Get your broom together, Avalanche. But now it comes to the question we ask of every game. Should a Christian play Hogwarts Legacy? And before we dive in, let me remind you all that as firm believers in the priesthood of the believer, we are not going to tell you yes or no. We're only going to tell you what's in the game and give you the information and scripture that you should consider to make that choice between God and yourself. We are not your priest. You are your priest. Your answer might be different than mine, and that's fine. It's between you and God. Hogwarts Legacy is a game that includes a power-hungry goblin and a ton of dark wizards running around trying to poach and steal and gain dark powers better left alone. So yes, there is plenty of violence, as you are required to hex and stun and blast your way through them to continue the story, or send rabbit cabbages after them. That being said, there isn't the violent killings like in minigames. There's no close-up shot of stabbings or blood and gore flying about, as there is in minigames. But blasts of light and enemies falling down, only to fade away, as games will. About the most violent that I found was when you use a finisher and repeatedly slam an enemy about. So, not a clean slate for this topic, more of a cartoony violence level. But there it is. Ah, yes, Butterbeer. Now, the Butterbeer served at Orlando Studios is legally not allowed to contain any alcohol. But it's more than a little likely that the Butterbeer of the books and the game does contain a bit of its own magic. And as a US native, the idea of putting alcohol anywhere near children is anathema. But I'm told that this teetotaling mentality is a bit prudish of Americans, and that Brits and others don't, or didn't, mind serving a wee nip occasionally. Do let me know if you're a UK native and can confirm or deny this, but I do know that the game is set in the 1800s, so well before Prohibition, in a time when even the prudish Baptist preachers would follow Paul's advice and drink a little wine for their stomach's sake, because, disease and such in the water. But other than the 3 broomsticks, the presence of alcohol is almost completely absent throughout the rest of the game. But your character will be bellying up to the bar once, for sure, in the game. However, briefly. Oh, there it is. The Grapphorn in the room. Witchcraft. Wizardry. In this advanced age where Harry Potter has been in the public conscious for decades, makes me feel old. It's hard to imagine for some that witchcraft would be a sticking point. But let me assure you that when the books came out, they caused quite the stir in the Christian world, and there are still quite a few that won't even think of opening the books because of the theme alone. And the big problem to me, which I hope to fix today, is that many of those are being hypocritical in their shunning of the wizarding world, even if they don't know it. And let me explain, and I'll try to do this tactfully, but I have to say that many preachers are, or at least were, preaching against it in ignorance rather than in knowledge. And you could tell that they didn't know what they were talking about when they talked about Harry Potter. So it comes as no shock that many Christians will shun Harry and go back to reading the Narnia series, or Star Wars, or other books with magic in them, and think nothing of the dissonance. Now, I'm not saying that if you believe that you should avoid reading books that talk about magic that you're wrong. I am saying that if that's your stance, at least be consistent to preserve your testimony. Let me explain. In the Bible, it is quite clear that witchcraft is a sin. And as God was founding the law for the nation, his nation of Israel, he outlawed witchcraft and made it punishable by death. But dispensationally, we're not living in the age of law, so please don't go stone your local coven. That's not your job. Rather, let's understand what was meant by witchcraft and wizardry and use that as our measuring stick. There are a few Hebrew words that we translate into witchcraft or divination or medium, even sorcerer or wizard, and a couple of Greek words from the root pharmakeia, which means to cast lots or divine the future. So the Bible is consistent in its condemnation of the use of necromancy and divination. Seeking to know the future from any other source than God is prohibited, and calling on spirits of the dead to seek knowledge of the future is forbidden. And indeed, divination is in the Potterverse. So if that's a line in the sand for you, you have your answer. Don't play the game. But that also precludes you from playing Star Wars games and reading the Narnia series, for they both contain communion with the dead or non-biblical prophecies, fortune-telling, if you will. There is also a historical understanding of the Greek word pharmakeia that would include the making of potions and elixirs to grant healing as part of witchcraft and thus part of the ban for Christians. And then, yes, also the potions class and the healing items would be a problem in the game. But by the same token, also a lot of other things become problematic for the Christian. Modern medicine, for example, or Stardew Valley, or any game with a healing item at all. So if that's your line in the sand, well, that's not a line that I can get behind, but if that's your line, please be consistent in the practice of your faith, and don't just avoid Harry Potter because of its wand-waving in popularity. Be informed, not ignorant. Now, if neither of those are the line you draw in the sand, let me say that you are required to take a divination class in the game. Much like the Butterbeer situation, however, after that, all divination activities are optional. You won't be able to 100% the game without doing more, but you will be close. Also, any necromancy in the game is viewed as a dark art and proscribed. Though I will note that in the books, Harry does happen to commune with the spirits of his dead parents and mentor. Don't at me about spoilers, it's been long enough. They're not spoilers, go read the books. And his talking with the dead is all nice and fine and lovey-dovey and certainly not condemned at all. So, do with that what you will. Also in the game, you will be presented the option to learn the unforgivable curses, but I can say confidently that you can finish the entire game without even learning one of them. Now, it's a bit weird here that both the conservative Christians and the LGBTQ community might want to ban the game for diametrically opposed reasons. You just gotta chuckle a bit sometimes. But the left is canceling entire people because they're playing the game at all. Because the creator of the Harry Potter is tweeting that she wants to protect women's safe spaces from the inclusion of men who've undergone transition surgery. And the right is avoiding the game because it includes a trans person. I can't speak to the left's view of things, but do let me say that if you are concerned about the inclusion of the LGBTQ representation, there are two things we found. One is a scientist that introduces the Merlin trials and offhandedly mentions that she needs to get back to her wife. And the second is the barman of the Three Broomsticks, who is clearly trans. You will meet him when you visit Hogsmeade the first time, and any subsequent visits to quests in the Three Broomsticks. And the clearly male voice acting will be off-putting to some. But, as the LGBTQ community has already said, his part in the game is clearly an afterthought, and is only a token representation. So, that's Hogwarts Legacy. Again, the choice to play it or not is between you and God, and we won't judge either way. But if you want more Christian reviews and Let's Plays, hit that subscribe button, and I'll play with you again next time.